So we are here with Sarah Parks, who is a member of the Neifert family. And Sarah is going to give us a little bit of insight into the history of this quilt and how it came through the Neifert family from Pennsylvania, eventually to Iowa, and how it ended up here at the Iowa Quilt Museum. So thanks for joining us today, Sarah. Sarah, do you live in Iowa?
I don't. I live in Texas
Okay.
now. We've been stationed here. Well, we've been here for 13 years. Not stationed anywhere. We just planted, rooted up. Here we are. But I'm an Iowa girl, born and raised, and spent my first 20 years there.
Very good. And as we understand it, you are kind of the family genealogist or historian, and so that's why we're talking to you today. Or your husband Forrest is.
That's him.
Yeah, that's him. Good.
Yes,
Good.
I recruited well.
Yes, for sure. Well, thanks both of you for being here today to talk to us about this quilt that we're so excited about. So let's start with how this quilt came, or how the Neifert family kind of thought to reach out to the Iowa Quilt Museum about this quilt.
Well, my grandmother, Helen Neifert, and had this quilt for years and years and years and years. I'm pretty sure it was probably given to Grandpa Neifert and passed on through his family for several years, and nobody ever really brought it out, or uh, obviously didn't use it. It wasn't there. I don't think it was ever put on a bed that I've ever remembered seeing. I don't think my dad ever remembers seeing it either. I think he talked about he's never seen it displayed on a bed, used. Brought out to show every once in a while, hey, look at this quilt. This is your family's quilt. And it had a little piece of paper on it with it handwritten. This is Lydia Bates Neifert's quilt. And but it had been kept in cedar chests for years and years. And my grandma and grandpa had moved into a assisted living place and had to downsize a lot. And so dad had them, and we pulled them out and looked at them. He says, what should we do with them? And Winterset has a beautiful little quilt museum. And I said, Dad, I don't know what their value is. And so he said, let's take them.
Well, I'd ask Megan and her staff to take a look at those and evaluate them in terms of if there was any significant historical value or something like that. And then the more we talked and the more she gave me feedback, I thought this is an opportunity to have some continuing education on something that belonged to our family. And I thought that was a logical place to send them. And my daughter agreed. And so that's where we are today.
Sarah and Forrest, can you tell us a little bit about your family's, not lineage down to the every single person, but kind of the general migration of the Neifert family from Pennsylvania to Iowa?
Okay, so the Neifert family, it was spelled Neufert at one point, Neufert, which is like new horse. They came in and settled into Pennsylvania.
And so the Neiferts arrived on Hans Jacob Neifert arrived on the ship Nancy in Pennsylvania. I think it was Philadelphia in 1752. And for several generations, the Neiferts stayed in Berks County, Pennsylvania. So if we go from Hans Jacob Neifert, then his son Johann Neifert, and then his grandson Jacob Neifert. And Jacob Neifert was the husband of Lydia Bates Neifert, who was the originator of the quilt. Their son was born on the farm in Pennsylvania, and then they moved to Attica. Well, he died in Attica, Iowa, Marion County, Iowa. And so Lydia Bates and her descendants moved from Pennsylvania, and then we go from David Bates Neifert to Jonathan Bates Neifert to Noel J. Neifert to Dale Vernon Neifert to Carl, and then to Sarah. And for the most part, well, they never left Iowa. Some of the siblings and whatever left, but the I guess the main line stayed put, and kind of bounced around Iowa a little bit, and the quilt kind of followed. I want to say it was the first son kind of thing, and
Yes.
ended up in Carl, well, in Helen's Dale's possession, and then went to Carl when they had to downsize.
So, Carl, if I'm counting correctly, you are the fifth generation of the owner of this quilt, from Lydia to Jonathan to Noel to Dale and now to Carl. Is that correct?
That sounds right.
All right. And at some point, it was the quilt maker herself who lived in Pennsylvania early in her life and then actually moved to Iowa. Mm-hmm.
Born in Berks County, Pennsylvania. And I've done some research into her family. We think her mother was a Bates and her father was a Bates, but they weren't necessarily, they obviously weren't brother and sister, but they were probably more likely first cousins or second cousins. And because the families stayed, like you were saying, the maker of the other quilt in Pennsylvania very well could have been a neighbor. And
Mm-hmm.
we've seen that throughout the when the Neiferts moved, the people they lived next to tend to move with them.
Mm-hmm.
And in a perfect case is the Neiferts and the Gaumonts were neighbors as they moved. They were neighbors in Pennsylvania, but they never married until Sarah's grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
They moved around. So she married in 1828 when she was 19, 20 years old. They had 10 children. She died in Marysville, Iowa, and that's where she's buried. So that's kind of where they started, where they ended up. There was nothing in between on census records or anything like that. I haven't found any record that said they stopped. There was a big migration of the Dutch from Pennsylvania to Iowa, and especially where
Mm-hmm.
the Neiferts settled. There's still a big
There's still a big
what's the
German, Dutch, and Amish.
the thing, the parade,
The pellet.
tulip time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there was a connection from one place to the next, and it just kind of continued on.
Mm-hmm.
Very strong Dutch and German ancestry in that area still.
Yeah, so she was married in Pennsylvania, and I was looking, almost the entire family, and I would, if I wanted to see if there was a link between the Neiferts and the Heinz, I would look at the Bethlehem Lutheran church records,
Mm-hmm.
because everything about the family a lot of it has come from those church records, and they go back to 1768.
Wow.
And so births, marriages, it's in there, and it's interesting. It's all in German, so.
Good luck.
Yeah.